and I decided just to give them each 30 minutes, but we can borrow time from some topics if we move more quickly on the first two. And just so you all know, I'm only here for the first hour because my post-secondary redesign committee is meeting at noon. So getting together with students and staff. So I'm excited for that first conversation. It's very timely. So wanted to just give everybody on this group a quick update with where we are in the post-secondary redesign process, and then mostly wanted to get your input on a key step that we still need to do, which is around the synthesis of the proposals that are going to be voted on and coming in, and need to initiate that process, and wanted to get this team's input today before doing that. So where we are with the work plan is that the committees have been formed. Yay, that was a process. And they are meeting, and with the exception of one that ended up being a group of two, I think we actually have really good size groups and really diverse across geographies as well as role within the organization. And so really excited to see how that came together and to learn from how we formed the committees and all of that process. It's been a really amazing learning experience. So each of the committees is at a minimum meeting twice for 2 hours. Yep.
Oh, okay, great. Yes, it seems like the recording hadn't started, so I just wanted to make sure that the updates for Rebecca were being recorded, but Alex just said yes, so.
Thanks for checking. And if folks want to follow along with the work plan, I did link it in the PSL notebook, but it's pretty overwhelming, so I'm just giving you the highlights so that you don't have to dive into the work plan. So the committees are each meeting twice at a minimum, and if they want to meet more than that, they're welcome to. And the first meeting is really focused on brainstorming and ideation, and then their goal by the end of that first meeting is to get to a core set of ideas that they want to develop further in their second meeting. And then each committee has a point person who's supposed to be synthesizing their proposal, which will be submitted next Thursday on the 27th. And then they're also appointing one person as their presenter at the meeting on June 8th. So that should be on everyone's calendars if you are interested in sort of hearing where the committees landed. Those of you who are not participating in committees, I think that would be a good call to join. We'll also record it, so it can be attached to the voting that happens the following week. So voting will be July 1 through July 5, and Amanda Albu and I are currently working on what that online voting process will look like. But I know, Jason, you had tried sort of a rudimentary version with Google Docs or Google Spreadsheets with your team. If anyone has any ideas or learning from having done something like this before of how to do that voting process, I'm all ears on that. But the main place that I wanted, besides taking any questions you have on where we are in the work plan and steps from here, wanted to get your input on what happens after the voting results come in on July 5th, which is basically from July 5th until the SMT meeting on the 24th. So actually materials need to be ready the Friday before that, which is the 20th, or is it the 19th? Sorry, I'm getting my dates muddled. Yeah, by Friday the 19th, we need to have a synthesized recommendation that we're putting before the senior management team to discuss on the 24th. And so there's going to be a lot of work that's needed in those 2 weeks, specifically the week of July 8th and July 15th, to stitch together all of the different pieces that we're getting from the proposals and the voting results. And so we had, Neha and I, when we talked about the updated work plan at the end of the month, had talked about kind of a recommendation committee that we recognized would need to be a pretty big time commitment, and also, so therefore might sort of lend itself more to staff than volunteers. But since Neha and I had that original conversation, I haven't actually launched a process for forming that committee. So wanted to present kind of 2 options I've been thinking about to this group and just weigh and get your feedback on which one we should move forward with. So, so I think one option for this group is that we send out a Google form similar to what we did with the process for actually joining a committee in the first place, and anyone from the stakeholder community can sign up to be a part of it. Or I guess it could be or we could do more of a nomination process where since many of the staff know the stakeholders who are not staff who are involved in the process, And also the hosts of each committee will have gotten to know their groups pretty well. We could also ask staff to nominate people who they think both would have the time and experience, but also interest in being part of this committee, or we could do some combination of those two things. So need to launch it today regardless. So wanted to get a quick pulse check from this group on the best way to form that committee, just recognizing it is going to be a pretty time-intensive process for that couple of week period, and it's like kind of the most important role I could imagine for really getting this convergent facilitation process to an actual recommendation that we put in front of the senior management team. So I will pause there. First, let's say, are there any questions about the work plan or process and just where we are? Erin, I think you're the only one who's actually hosted a committee that's already met. Do you have any highlights that you want to share just to kind of bring them to life for those who are not in committee?
We actually haven't met. Tonight is our first our first meeting. So so I'm
my first meeting's at noon too. So
yeah. So I don't know. I think our group is a little bit smaller. So it's like only 4 people. So I think. And so I am curious to see sort of how it goes with a smaller group. I kind of overheard Caitlin's group yesterday meeting. Our walls are really thin in our office right now, and so it sounded like really good, and it sounded like actually having more people made ideas come a little bit faster. I mean, that makes sense. But, just thinking about like smaller and bigger groups. So.
Yeah, my group is also smaller. We had 4, and then our post-secondary student might have to bow out because of a family situation that came up today. So yeah, I'm interested to see how it'll go with the smaller group too. So go back to questions, anything? Double wait time you as a former teacher.
I don't know the question yet. I just had a thought as I'm looking from an external lens. It's very complex, but I'm super appreciative of those who are kind of in the weeds and doing it. And so is there, I guess, like, how are we bringing along team members who might have been stakeholders who might be stakeholders again, but have not been stakeholders in this ongoing process so that it's easy to understand like the critical information? Because even just listening to all of this without looking at the whole entire plan, it was hard to understand.
Super appreciate that. I resonate with that, having had to develop my own understanding of the process very quickly. So the next touch point with the stakeholders is the meeting on the 28th, which we're all invited to. So there will be a reminder that will go out about that meeting probably early next week, just to kind of re-invite folks to it, and we can provide some other updates in that email as well. About sort of where we land with the process for the recommendation committee and the next steps from there. So all of those steps were communicated in the first email, but I hear you that simplifying them and continuing to communicate them is a good idea. So that the next touch point will be that email and then that meeting on the 28th, which is open to the full stakeholder group.
I'm just curious for other sites, have you all done anything since like the stakeholder groups to share updates with or bring teammates along that aren't part of the, or haven't been part of the stakeholder groups?
No. No, I would have to, not directly, but I could circle back around with Dallas after this to gauge what she's aware of, but not that I know of, not in any staff meetings or anything that we've been doing collectively. So that is kind of like a missing, I think we have a post-secondary team, and I know they're probably fully aware of where we're at and what's going on, but I think the larger team is probably not.
there's definitely a meaningful number of people from every site involved in the committees, and so maybe an idea is to have those who are directly involved somehow share out the highlights from where we are in the process, because I think the folks who are involved in the committees are probably the most in the loop with where we are. So that could be one idea.
Yeah, we shared at a staff meeting, I think not this past week, but the week before. And we also have quite a few of our staff who are involved. So I think that people are feeling pretty in the loop, but I think I agree, like some sort of like simplified communication would make it easier, because I think it's a little bit like explaining sort of an intricate ecosystem to someone who's like on a different planet. So I think it would be helpful to have like something that's a little bit simplified.
Great. Well, I will aim for simplicity in the stakeholder update that goes out next week, and maybe one idea too that you can forward that to your broader program teams if they're not on that list. So that will be an update that you can share. That'll come out early next week. Great. Well, since we're getting towards the end of our first half hour, wanted to get your feedback on the recommendation committee and just both what's most in line with the conversion facilitation way of working, as well as feasible given the time that we have. So I embedded in the OneNote some kind of needs for the recommendation committee that Meha and I had drafted back when we were updating the work plan. So they're in the links and supporting materials part of the agenda. Just give me a thumbs up when you're there so I know that you're.
I'm here.
You said in the PSL OneNote?
Yeah, in the PSL OneNote at the top of the agenda that Alex created, there's a links and supporting materials section, and there's a PS redesign section within that that says recommendation committee needs, and there are a few bullets. Okay. So the needs are basically an ability to commit 10 to 12 hours, we think, which would be spread over 2 weeks, but predominantly that first week of July 8th through 12th. And then the three kind of main overarching needs that we identified were one was just a commitment to being grounded in multiple perspectives that are represented in the design criteria, and then being able to represent the broader stakeholder group versus championing one's own idea or perspective or that of their group. An interest or experience with program design we thought would be great to have represented on this group, and then also comfort with seeing the big picture and grasping details. So this is beginning to sound like a job description, but we're going to need to step back and consider the full context of summer search and how the work is interconnected, while also looking at pretty detailed proposals and weaving together and synthesizing those. And so definitely will benefit from having people who are sort of able to operate in both of those levels. So with those needs in mind, wanted to just get your quick input on whether we think we want to do a combination of people self-selecting into this versus a nomination process, or both, or just any thoughts. I honestly haven't had much bandwidth to give it much thought, and just thought this group would have a really good read on what would be both honoring convergent facilitation as well as well designed for our group and team.
I have a personal recommendation around if it's self-opt-in, like how do we make sure that there's a manager kind of doing the recommendation behind it? Because something that's come up is when you're looking at that bullet around like higher level thinking and really being able to kind of pull up and look at the whole picture. I do think there will be some individuals who will struggle a little bit with that. And so are we making sure there's the skill set in those that we're bringing in to make this decision?
Yeah. That was exactly my wondering in doing a self-selection process, is just that like ability to name these skills versus someone else naming them about you. So.
Do you have a sense of ideal group size, Molly, of like how big would you want the group to be for it to be like helpful and also to be able to be facilitated?
Yeah, I don't have a specific number, but I have a couple of responses to that. One is that Lindsay and or myself, probably both of us, will definitely be on this group just to represent the NAPT perspective. But we would love to have as many stakeholders as we can, while also recognizing that with a time commitment of this amount, scheduling is going to be a challenge, and so we're going to need to be somewhat smaller and nimble. So I was thinking maybe like 4 to 5 people, where maybe not every site is represented, but we have at least one small site and larger sites, and then potentially, you know, a mixture of staff members and maybe like one alum or student if we have someone who has the time available. When I was in Seattle this week, Therese let me know that they have a fellow this summer who's going to be working with their team, for whom this project is very aligned with both her graduate work as well as the work she'll be doing at Summer Search. And so Rebecca and I were talking about the possibility of having her as like the kind of note taker facilitator in the process, so that the rest of us could be full participants. So that's one other person who we've talked about.
That was something that was coming up for me, was the question around roles, and like because if you're looking at a group of 4 to 5 people, are in some ways, would it be helpful to sort of think about a few roles that we think people could play? I don't know, from a nomination perspective. I mean, it sounds like that the fellow in Seattle would be like a good like note taker, so you said note taker facilitator, and then I'm wondering what other roles you sort of see this group needing to be successful and, like you said, nimble.
Yeah, that's a good question. I know that the reason why Lindsay and I need to be involved is that we need to think about the staffing implications and potential budget implications, which will need to be part of the SMT recommendations. So we're definitely going to be heavily involved in the second week. And then I think we'll be equally involved as other participants in the first week as in just the overall synthesis process. But besides that, sort of like making sure that the staffing and budget implications are taken care of, I think the other people would be somewhat equal participants, but I've never done a process like this before, so I don't know if those who have more experience with convergent facilitation, this is not like a thing that is in convergent facilitation either, it's sort of unique to our process. So we are inventing together.
I'm just thinking if the group needed to be that small, my inclination would just be to have folks from the post-secondary cohort or college success cohort make it up in addition to Molly and Lindsay. The only other factor I think is what this means for high school students and transitions. So that's where I could see other people being involved too, whether it's PSLs or like high school staff, whether it's directors or whoever. But the more I'm talking, like the more people this makes, which I think could be fine. So I don't know if we can be too stuck to that small number.
That's a great point.
Yeah,
I think those cohorts could be like a good option, and they would probably, just thinking about the line of like they have like broader perspective versus championing their own ideas, just because they've been sort of like a part of the process from the beginning, might be able to like do that diversification of ideas, and with like less of them having to be involved might give them a chance to sort of like figure out who going to be the best person, best group of people to move forward in that.
Okay.
I'm going back and forth about this, but I'm wondering if a development perspective might be helpful to have in that group, because I guess the thing I've seen is a bit of a disconnect, it seems like, between the like program work and program needs and then how it's being received by folks who are thinking primarily about funding. And so I wonder if it might be helpful to this part of the process to like proactively invite that perspective in so that there's buy-in, and that it's like holistically done. And I was trying to like rack through any like development staff that have program experience or like deep program interest. Yeah, so that was coming to mind.
Well, we had 3 EDs who ended up being involved with the committees, Chris, Sylvia, and Melanie. So they wear both program and development hats. I don't know whether any of them would have time for it, but I can certainly include them if we were thinking about sort of like at least one PSL, at least one ED, some reps from the CS cohort, and then maybe someone from high school programming, just to represent the different. Am I missing any other categories? I could maybe just send out a staff email around this process, and then also just invite anyone who's on that list, if there is a student or an alum who comes to mind as having the time, bandwidth, and experience to join, to also encourage those folks to nominate those participants, and I can do individual outreach. I agree with Erica, but I'm just a little bit worried about doing a complete self-nomination form if that doesn't end up getting us just given the time pressures around this, the folks we actually need. So that's why I was kind of thinking through more of a nomination process. So, Jason, when you were saying the high school perspective, do you think that could be carried by a PSL, or were you actually thinking like at least one mentor or program manager?
I think it could be carried by PSL, but I think it would also be helpful. It could be helpful if it was just a PSL for someone who's actually worked more directly in high school program before being in this role.
Okay.
But that might be, I don't know, overthinking it.
Okay. So I will send out an email to all of the staff participants in the committees, and with more information about this committee, and ask for volunteers / nominations that represent those perspectives that we just named. So a PSL, folks from the college success cohort, someone who has the high school program experience directly, but maybe in the past, and then the development perspective from EDs. And yeah, if any of you are interested, if you want to just ping me separately, you don't have to volunteer in front of everyone. If you want to just send me a separate email to let me know, I think that would be really helpful.
Just one question as you're doing that, Molly, is if the like gift cards, oh shoot, we need to do the gift cards for the first, sorry. The gift cards will be done for the stakeholder groups, but then the compensation for this, even if it's more staff, it feels like, you know, if we had a mentor or even a college success associate interested in this, it's 10 to 12 hours of their time, and they have full jobs. So I'm just curious about what could be offered, and if sites would be absorbing that, or if our national team is offering anything toward that.
Yeah, I actually don't have any experience with that at Summer Search, so I don't know how we've done incentives in the past, but I can do some inquiry about that. Is that something that we typically do when people volunteer for working group type opportunities?
Not that I've heard of it. I think that like the concern I've heard from the Bay Area team is that they're asked to engage in a lot of work with national cohorts or national initiatives, and aren't compensated for it. And so I don't think there's a good practice. I also don't think it's great to just like keep asking for volunteers to do stuff where it's like, this is real work.
Okay, well, I can do some more inquiry into that. And at a minimum, I think we can commit to supporting people for how to represent being part of this process in their resume, or like we had said, for the participation in the broader committees. So that we had deprioritized that as a later thing, but I think we can, particularly for the folks participating in this group, since it is a pretty unique role for the organization. Great. Well, any other thoughts or questions on post-secondary redesign, please don't hesitate to email me. I want to transition us to annual planning just we're at the 30-minute mark, and I only have, so I need to actually step off a little bit early to make sure I'm ready for my committee meeting. So wanted to just bring you all along. You're probably talking to your EDs, or maybe not, but it's just sort of where we are in the process for planning for next year, both around our foundational initiatives as well as our core practice areas, and in particular wanted to get this group's input on where and when to collaborate on this process. So wanted to give you an update on where we are, what's been done, what is still to do, because I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to, from what I hear, do this differently than it's been done in the past in a more collaborative way, and we're starting earlier, from what I understand, on that collaboration than we have in the past too, which is great. So what has happened so far is really around the foundational initiatives. So there's been some norming across sites and the national team about sort of what is a foundational initiative in our planning process, and what does it mean. And there's essentially two criteria for what has been, or what continues to be considered a foundational initiative. One is that it has cross-departmental /site implications for the organization. So an initiative that if something is off schedule or behind schedule in program has a ripple effect throughout the organization. So impact sites, impact talent, impact finance, just that sort of far-reaching type work. And then the second criteria is that it's the foundation of our strategic plan. So things that were called out as priorities in the strategic plan are continuing to be called foundational initiatives. So there are currently 6 that we are planning around for next year. I think that's, I don't actually know what was considered a foundational initiative this year. But the 3 that are most relevant to program, and I'll name the other ones just so you have them, and I can capture this, or just, I can figure out where to put this in the OneNote. I'm not going to do it now because I don't want to take time, but I'll make sure.
I'm taking notes. I'll write them down here for you.
Yeah. Thanks, Alex. Do that. So the first foundational initiative is Program Foundations, and that has, it's basically began this year with our refreshed theory of change, but that work doesn't stop. Now that we have the refreshed theory of change, there's a lot of work that continues in that particular initiative, and I'm happy to get into the specifics of that, but that is continuing as a foundational initiative. The second is hybrid mentoring and the site implementation of hybrid mentoring. The third is post-secondary redesign, which we just talked about. So those are the 3 that are program related, and then the 3 that are, well, I guess alumni is kind of both. So there's an alumni engagement strategy that is also a foundational initiative. And then the 2 that are non-specifically program are the talent strategy, specifically the competencies, and one that was newly nominated to be part of the foundational initiative is our multi-year revenue strategy, which has been a major priority for the development team in EDs this year, but it wasn't named as a foundational initiative, and it was sort of nominated as being the fuel of all of the others, and so therefore needing the same level of attention in our planning. So with those 6 foundational initiatives, what has happened so far is both just the confirmation of that those are our foundational initiatives for the next year. And then there's been an initial pass at planning out what are the key milestones for each of these foundational initiatives. And at this point, the only look at interdependencies or sequencing across those milestones has happened across national departments to sort of identify, so if this is happening in this month, how will it affect marketing, finance, talent, so just across the national teams. And now the work that's going to really happen towards the end of this month and then in July is thinking that with our site calendars. And so the ED should be fairly familiar with this timeline and process too, but just wanted to make sure you understood the program side of it. So the goal is that by the end of July, we will have aligned on our plans for the foundational initiatives for next year in a way that has identified all of the interdependencies, identified hotspots, and where we need to spread things out or sequencing issues. So my first question for you to noodle on is, we're supposed to come up with a stakeholder engagement map of kind of who to involve over the course of the month of July as we get further into our planning for the foundational initiatives. And so we don't have to fully fill that out now, but I wanted to begin the conversation about sort of who should be involved with each of the program-related foundational initiative planning in July alongside the NAPT. The second set of planning is around what are now being called core practice areas, which I still, being a new person, I don't actually know whether we've used that term in the past or whether it's new. Some people have said it's new. Some people have said it's not, so I don't actually know. But my understanding of what core practice areas are essentially like, as a national network, what are the core services that each national team is providing for the rest of the network. Last year, I think the service level agreements were sort of capturing the core practice areas. And my understanding this year is that we're kind of norming first on what those core practice areas should be, such that we can then commit to a set of those service level agreements that will then be the foundation of sort of what we're holding ourselves accountable to and measuring ourselves against. And correct me if I'm getting this history wrong, but my understanding is last year, the service level agreements, that was our first time doing that as a national network, and they were largely descriptive of what we were already doing as opposed to actually taking a step back and looking strategically about what the network most needs and what we should be doing. And so I think the real goal this year is, now that we're doing them again, to be more strategic and to be more actually grounded in site needs as well as the national priorities, to make sure that we have a set of core practice areas that are actually mapped to the outcomes that we're hoping to achieve and what we need to do together. So at this point, the only things that have happened around core practice areas, we have our staff quarterly surveys, and we now have 2 sets of data on those, which are providing data on last year's service level agreements. And I think everyone has sort of acknowledged that those data are helpful in some ways, but also kind of missing a lot of the real story behind the story. So that's one set of data that we have. And then the EDs just went through a process of kind of looking at the existing service level agreements and kind of from their perspective, and they didn't have much time to do this. And so some of you may have been involved in this and some of you may not have, depending on your ED. Went through a process of kind of rating which of them were most essential as a network for us to have, and which of them felt like they should still live at the national level versus potentially thinking about whether there'd be more of a site level responsibility and no longer something that we prioritize nationally. So just this morning at 9 o'clock, I saw the ED's kind of collective feedback on the core practice areas. So those are 2 sources of input we have so far, but again, over the course of the month of July, we have the opportunity, and I've been, the third source of input that is already underway are my site visits. So those of you who've had your sort of one-on-ones with me, where I've had us focus on a particular set of questions, those are going to be a key input into figuring out these core practice areas. So sorry, that's the third thing that's underway. So in addition to the existing data from the staff surveys, from the EDs, and from my site visits, have a real opportunity, I think, to do this collaboratively in the month of July. And one thing I just want to name to all of you is that I felt a pretty big gulf between what I heard and saw in the ED ratings on the core practice areas and what I've been hearing and listening to in my site visits. And so I think that to me is interesting. I just want to better understand all of the layers there. And so that's where I think you all will be a really valuable and important partner to the NAPT. As someone who's on the leadership team of your site, working directly with your ED, but also holds those same perspectives that I've been listening to and hearing on your sites. And so really want to make sure that we're balancing because the EDs all sit on the SMT, and I'm just one person representing program on the SMT, that we have that broader organizational perspective represented, especially in the core practice areas. So that's the update side of things, and just really wanted to begin the conversation today in thinking through whether we want to make sure that there's some key PSL calls throughout July devoted to both foundational initiatives and core practice areas where we can have group level discussions. I already have the one-on-one set up with each of you, or follow-ups from our site visit if we didn't finish our conversation. So since we just had to meet each other as our first meeting. So Erin and I actually did our kind of second level conversation yesterday, and Jason and I are scheduled for next week, and my son Erica and I are scheduled for next week. And I talked to Rebecca. Rebecca and I had quite a bit of time together in Seattle, and Sam, I think we need to loop back and get some time as well. So that's a first step, but wanted to get your initial input. One question I have is like, how much are you already aware of this from your EDs? Am I just like repeating a bunch of information you already know? Okay. Well, then I'm glad we're talking about it. I just saw one head shake. I shouldn't actually assume that others are in the same boat.
No, I asked a lot of questions last week when I heard a little bit about it, but Sylvia didn't have a lot of information, and so I think it didn't really, yeah, it didn't quite land the way that it was meant to.
Hey, Molly, I can't remember how long ago, but some weeks ago, maybe several calls ago, on the PSL call, I was just looking for the document, but I can't find it. And it outlined, I think, the strategic initiatives from last year. And I think the last message was that document was going to get updated because it still included FY19. Is that document going to be, so are these 6 areas the content that will replace that document, and will that be revised and sent back out?
Thank you for revisiting the past discussion, just so we have through lines from the previous time. So that was the planning document for FY19 that captured all of the key milestones for each initiative. We're using slightly different documents to plan out FY20, but in concept, yes. Basically the next iteration of what we captured for FY19 is in the process of being created for FY20, where we're looking for each foundational initiative, what are the key milestones, and when is that happening. We're just using a Gantt chart this time in Excel so that we can look at it more across months and quarters, and be able to have that look at like what's actually happening in August, what's happening in September. But it's building from this year's version. So that's the next gen version of that milestone document. So, I mean, I think one initial step that we can take is we're going to do some additional work on that with the NAPT next week, and I think a first step could be to share that out with PSL coming out of that meeting, just for your review and build in discussion time around it.
There were some other categories. I'm looking for this document. I just had it. There's some other categories like target population, and what happened to those?
Great.
Yeah.
Great question. So we did a little bit of reorganization based on what is needed for FY20. That's a great question. So target population, which was part of program foundations last year, we actually decided should live in hybrid mentoring in next year, because that's when outreach and recruitment of new students happens in our program, is in our high school program. And so it made sense to revisit now that we have our refresh theory of change, revisit the target population conversation as part of the outreach work that's being done in hybrid mentoring. So that is now in Alex's work plan. So everything that existed from FY19 has a home within the new initiatives unless it's truly done. I don't know if there's anything that was like completed in FY19 that doesn't carry into 20. I don't know if I can name any examples that were like.
Okay, so I found the document, right? So there's like, there's co-pilot training, student safety. Those things will be inserted into one of those categories, probably GMP. That mentoring was also on.
Yeah, I'll have to take a look back at exactly how the work was categorized last year, Sam, since I just wasn't here, and so I don't have total, I can't like recall exactly what was where. But I do think that there's a good question to be asked around, like, I think co-pilot training actually is a really good example of something that is a core practice area, because co-pilot is a service that we provide as a national network, and so any sort of training and initiatives that are related to it, I think would actually live in the core practice area bucket. Depth Mentoring Institute is part of Program Foundation still, because that's the place where we're like codifying and capturing our program model so that we can do the Train the Trainer Institute in the fall. So that's still continuing to live in Program Foundation. So yeah, I don't want to get into all the details of it today, but I think the headline for all of you is that all of the work that is continuing will live in, well, there might be some recategorization, but we'll make it clear when we actually share those documents, sort of where things landed from FY19 if they did move. But didn't mean to, yeah.
I do have a budget question, which might be jumping ahead. So my sense is that the budget process is changing from how it has been done in the past. And I've like seen the Gantt chart from afar, but like haven't seen it like up close. And so I'm just sort of wondering, I'm getting a lot of like budget for FY20 requests, and so I'm trying to like kind of figure out what the process is, but I haven't really been able to grasp like the big picture and how it's shifting and changing from last year. But it seems like it's earlier and maybe attempting to like sort of not fall into the same traps it has in the past, which is great, but I just don't have the big picture. I don't know when I'm going to.
Thank you for looking that up. I definitely don't either, but I think Will would be the best person. So maybe what we could do is schedule, if you aren't able, I think one option is that we just make sure that the EDs are partnering with you in providing that information, since they have been in close touch with Will about what the process will look like, or will be in close touch with him if they haven't already. But I think another potential touch point is having Will join this meeting, if that made sense. So I'll talk to him about that. But that's a great question, Miriam. Thanks.
I think that would be great.
Yeah, an overview of just kind of like from a program side, I think would be really helpful, because I think often my conversations with our ED get really focused on revenue, and that is important. And also like want to focus on the part that impacts program staff and students.
Well, since I have to hop off in 2 minutes, I think I wasn't fully aware that you wouldn't have heard about this process yet, and so I'm just sort of like in real time trying to figure out next steps. So I think maybe what would make sense from here is that I can partner with Will to actually send you a summary email of kind of like the key stages of the process, and from the foundational initiatives perspective, as well as core practice areas, like what the deadlines are, and then from there, maybe we can at least by email do a path that's sort of the stakeholder engagement piece, and when to loop PSLs in versus other broader members of the team and community. The other piece of this is that we're trying out the new SMP decision-making framework, and so this is all part of the research phase before we formulate any budget recommendations. We're all meant to be engaging stakeholders across the team and broader community in formulating our recommendations, and so that's the other layer that I forgot to mention that is being tried newly. I don't know if any of you joined those decision-making workshops that Will facilitated or are familiar with the new process, but that's another layer here. Okay, well, it won't happen this week, but sometime next week I will send you all an email with just like the key next steps that are happening with planning, and then if we could at least start an electronic exchange, and then we can pick it up in a future PSL call as well. And I'll talk to Will about the budget piece that Erin raised. Any other final questions that you want to make sure we address, even though we don't have time to address them today, but just to make sure we get to them later?
Is the PSL call next week happening?
NAPT will not be able to be there because we're in retreat, but if you all want to self-organize and have your own meeting at that time, that's for you to do. But yeah, we will not be there. So I can ask Lindsay to, I don't know whether, should we leave the invite there so that you can have the time protected? I know sometimes it's nice just to be like, this is on my calendar even though I'm not going to be there.
I would say yes.
Leave it there? Okay. Great. Well, thank you all. I'm going to go jump on my post-secondary redesign committee, and I'm going to turn it over to Alex and Ranziman, who have the next topic.
Hi, Molly. I think we have like 3 minutes before the outreach cohort folks join us, so if you need a well-being break, I know I'm going to have to step away for a minute. Hi.
Roxy, did you go to Stern Grove this weekend?
I did.
How was
It
it?
was super fun. It was really fun.
Nice.
It's been years since I've gone, like pre-kids years, so at least 6 years. But it was good. It was really fun and relaxing, yeah.
Awesome.
Hi, Tolu.
Hi, everyone.
We'll just give folks another minute or two. Our PSL group is just regrouping. We took a little break from after our first hour. And then I know we're expecting a couple more folks from the outreach cohort too. We'll get started in a minute.
I don't know if everybody is all caught up with their email yet, but we have our first end of summer survey response in. So it's exciting. We have the whole process automated in from Salesforce now. So poor Amanda and your mentors and everybody else don't have to go through Excel and all that kind of stuff now. So we'll have all those reports and stuff like that ready for everybody to kind of like do their own monitoring. Completion status and all that, but Amanda will also be sending out weekly updates too. So we're really excited to kick this off.
Yay!
And it's also given us good insight on how to get form assembly up and running for what we're going to be talking about next. So I just wanted to share that it's been a really good and interesting process to get technology on our side for once.
Awesome. That's a good update, Roxanne, and a good segue into our time. I think we can get started since we have an hour for the next two topics. Sam, is there any, or Martina or Armani in the room with you?
I'm here.
Hey, Martina. Okay, cool. I just want to see.
About to say she's somewhere around, I'm sure.
Okay, so we have Martina, Tolu, Bradley here from the cohort. Great, and I think Bethany is planning to join too. Great, okay, I'm gonna share my screen. So I'm just gonna give like a couple updates. Recently in the last few conversations, the cohort has really been focused on the strategy and thinking bigger picture about what we need to modify about outreach to mostly reduce barriers to our students, for our students and for our families. And we revisited the recommendations that came out of the Males of Color initiative that the outreach cohort generated last year when we were thinking about the barriers and what we could do to address those barriers. And we really narrowed down the focus of our conversation to really 1 to 2 national, like network-wide recommendations for FY20 regarding outreach, and then started to talking about a few local site pilots that we could test a few things in the outreach process to apply broadly across the network in 21, pending the findings. So we really recognize that it would be helpful to broaden out the discussion and involve all of you on the PSL so that we can move forward with alignment and synergy around what we're doing and to make sure that everybody has the same information. So that's kind of the purpose of this time, is to bring you all in the loop. Hey, Martina. Anyone from the cohort, do you want to elaborate on anything or clarify anything? Okay. Okay. All right, great. Let me see if I can, let me share my screen here. Okay. All right. So yeah, just to we're gonna update you on the recommendations coming out of the cohort for 20, and then also want to have a discussion about one of the proposals for updating the application, which is possibly removing the proof of income requirement from the application and putting it somewhere else. So that's the place where we want to engage this group in a discussion. Okay, and I'll pause after each slide to see, there's only a couple, 4 slides, just to see if there's anything that the cohort members want to add. But we kind of clarified 2 primary network-wide recommendations to outreach for next year. One important piece of information is that we don't think that the strategy, we will continue to revisit and update the strategy and want to do that really intentionally, looking at the next few years by having a retreat in FY20 to really map out what else needs to change about our strategy. We just really focused on the 2 ideas that we thought would decrease the barriers to students the most, and also be like feasible to implement in 20 when we have a lot of things happening. And so we talked most about updating the student parent facing website, which we've already talked about with Marcom, and that will include updating the content, both to make it more student and parent friendly and focused, and also to align with our new theory of change and our new outcomes, to make the content translated into several languages, and that's something that there is a functionality to do. I talked with Nathan about that, where you could add a button and that page could be available in a few different languages. To upload a new outreach video that is going to be funded by Marcom's FY19 budget, and that Brendan Hill from Marcom is leading, and some sites are going to be partnering to get some local site footage, B-roll, to include in that video. We can also link the online application to the site. I just started having that conversation with Ron Xuan. And then we want to commit to like a process during recruitment to actually update the website in real time based on feedback that we're getting from parents and students. So that's the website recommendation. The next recommendation is to launch an online student application using form assembly, which Ron Xuan mentioned was tested successfully in the administration of the end of summer survey. So we would be using that. And one component of that is moving exclusively to an online application, because in the pilot, we tested doing both online and paper, and then New York also tested last year doing online and paper. And what we found in both of those pilots is that because the paper existed, that was the default, and there wasn't like a complementary plan to message or prioritize the online application. So if we did an online application based on what we learned in those last 2 pilots, it'd probably be most useful if we just did the online application. And then something we're also trying to figure out, and I started talking about with Ron Xuan, and Armani provided some great resources on, is making sure that the e-signature is an option in the online application. Okay, I'll stop there. So those are the 2 network-wide enhancements. Any additions from the cohort? And then I'd love to hear PSL's questions, thoughts from y'all.
Total and Philly, I thought you covered pretty much everything, Alex. So yeah, I have nothing more to add there.
Okay. Then PSLs, do y'all have any questions, thoughts, considerations?
Well, it sounds exciting, right? I'm curious to understand kind of the timeline. And does this mean that we would fully do away with all paper applications this year? And I'm assuming the online application will be integrated straight into Copilot.
Yeah. So Ron Xuan, do you want to speak to that Sam's last point about Copilot integration or Salesforce integration?
Yes. And so just as a reminder,
Can I throw one?
we refer to the database as Salesforce, not Copilot. And so with doing the online applications, what would happen is that the data would be sent directly to Salesforce. So it would eliminate data entry for your staff.
Woo!
Okay. So one additional question to that. So what happens to the old archives, folders and data that we've had prior to this process? So there's also like folders that we have here at Boston that pre-existed Salesforce. Do we still keep those, or?
Are you referring to paper files
Yes.
or SharePoint? That is a good question. I don't know, Alex, if you have talked about that piece of it yet, but I don't know.
We haven't
Yeah,
we haven't revisited that in the past year, but historically there has been like a policy that everyone's committed to around saving documents, and we have been expected to save them for a certain number of years. Janice has held that, so I can follow up with her and we can add that as a topic to an upcoming call.
Okay, thank you.
Sam, we are in the process of doing a lot of digitization in our office right now. So I'm happy to also talk to you more about the work that we've done, which sort of combined what Janice had done and then what the Bay Area did when they moved to Oakland. So happy to talk more through it. There's a lot of paper. That's what we learned and keep learning.
Thank you.
You asked also, Sam, about timeline. So we don't have the exact timeline mapped out yet. That's work Ronxman and I need to do in partnership with the cohort. But we know we think that it's feasible based on our initial conversations to have this ready for this outreach season. And all of our materials. The goal to have all the outreach materials ready is the very end of August. At least that's the historic date that we've had these items available. And then regarding the paper application, maybe that's something for us to talk about more. I just know that it didn't, when we had both the paper and the online application available in other trials, nobody filled out the online application because we didn't build the systems or change the systems to support filling out the online application, and people just defaulted to the paper version. So my recommendation would be that we just have an online application because of that, and that's something we could talk through more.
I had a couple questions related to that. One I'm sure the cohort has talked through already, but I guess my concern would be like if having the online application poses an additional barrier to a small number of students or families. So one question is, would form assembly work equally as well over smartphones? Is that part of the design? And then the other question would be if, for whatever reason, a student or a parent is just not set up to fill out an online application at all, can there just be an option for a paper app in that moment?
I saw Ronxman give you a thumbs up, Jason, about the compatibility on cell phone. Do you want to say any more about that?
Oh, I was just going to say, when we build out the form, we have the options to view it on 3 types of media, so a standard desktop, mobile phone view, and a tablet view. So we can ensure that you can see it and fill it out on whatever device that you have. The one thing that we'll also research as well goes along with the e-signature. Does that also translate over to mobile? And so that would depend on whoever our e-signature provider would be, but we'll also look into that as well. And then, the option is, if the paper has to become an option, then it would just require someone coming, taking that paper application and like one of your staff and just inputting it into the actual form itself, into the survey form assembly itself, and then figuring out how to do what the workaround is for the e-signature in that way. But I'll let Alex take the rest of that from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think that's a good question, and that's one we're always asking. Is like we work with human beings and people, and there are extenuating circumstances. So I think that I could imagine that if we're really clear about really prioritizing the online application and why, and build in the systems like time during the application workshop for students to fill out the application or something like that, then we can still make some accommodations for students, knowing that we'll have to. So yeah, I think that makes sense to me, and it's consistent with how we've tend to approach our service with students. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving because we'll have more time to figure out the details about these items as we plan and create the online application. All right, let's see. This next slide, I'll put this up after the call, so I won't go over this in detail, but this is just in addition to those two new things. We're also going to be doing what we always do, which is to revamp the outreach materials. And there are going to be 3 things that we're doing to them this year. One is the standard updates we always make, like updating the year and the date. 2 is updating the language, the new language that aligns with the work with our strategic plan and the theory of change. And Molly and Liz are leading that, like language updating, so we can integrate it into the outreach. And then the 3rd thing we're doing is making parallel resources for hybrid mentoring. So we'll have a classic version of all these outreach materials and then also a hybrid version. Okay. I wanted to just touch briefly on cost, just to say that for the things we've talked about so far, there aren't additional monetary costs because we already have paid for form assembly, marketing's covering the cost of the outreach production of the video. The new costs are really related to translation. So translation for the website content and the materials and outreach. Last year, it cost $10,000 to translate all of the outreach materials, and that was an unbudgeted expense. So we just want to make sure that as we're planning budgeting for next year, we're accounting for that. And maybe in a future call, should be talking about how are these costs shared, just given that like every site, some sites just translate to one language, some sites translate to several others. Depending on the language, the cost is more. So there might be more for us to get into about that in a future budgeting call. But I think we can expect with the addition of the website to pay between $10,000 and $13,000 in translation costs. And then the one other expense that I wanted to flag now is we talked about last year. We included in the like optimal budget version a request for funds for an outreach cohort retreat, and that didn't make it. That didn't land in the final budget. So just wanted to lift up and raise early. And now that request for outreach cohort retreat in FY20, and the purpose of that will really be to debrief how outreach season went now in this new hybrid mentoring model, and also continue the strategy work for FY21 and beyond. And so that, I think that I just did some cost estimates, and I think that we can expect that to cost between $1,300 and $1,500 a person. I know cohort, we didn't talk about this. I just added this for this call. So are there any questions about this or any costs that I didn't see and cover here? Okay. Okay. All right. So this one I don't think we'll get into. I think we need to talk some more as a cohort. But the other thing we started exploring were those pilots, those site level pilots to test things. So some ideas that surfaced was like, will we pilot not having interviews at one of our sites? Will we pilot a different version of our application workshop that's actually more experiential? And there's interest in Bay Area and New York for that. Piloting open nominations like y'all are planning in Bay Area, where anyone can nominate anyone. So it can be a self-nomination, a peer nomination, an RP nomination. So we didn't land on what pilots they are. I think we still have to talk about that, and maybe that's a conversation we continue with this broader group, but I at least wanted to flag it here. Are there thoughts, are there preferences here? Does it feel like a cohort, does it feel like we just need to align on this a little bit more, or do you think there's value in picking this conversation up with the PSL group?
It seems like the interview one, and for me personally, I'm most curious about to learn more.
Yeah, you want me to speak on that, Alex? Yeah, so in the Bay, so just to give a little quick recap, we've, at least at this site, Bay Area, interviews used to be really personal, really intrusive, I think, for many folks. And we've gotten feedback from alumni, from staff, from students to really reduce the digging and the emotional kind of prying that goes on within interviews. So in the past, I'd say maybe 3 to 4 years, we've done less of that. And it's definitely been more of a not going to say superficial, but just like a surface level kind of conversations, getting to know the students, them like explaining more about the program, how they would fit into it. And so it's much less now kind of get to know you, dig in and see kind of what you need to work on social emotionally. And what we found that most people now that we're interviewing, I would say like a high 90s are candidates. We're not really filtering anybody out within that process. And interviews require such a lift. It is such a big lift to work with. We have 30 plus schools across the Bay Area in which we're working and partnering with interviews. We have we have like 30 plus staff in the high school program to coordinate with. It takes up a lot of our time. It takes up months and months of work to do this. And so our director of high school program and I were kind of having a conversation about what if we didn't do interviews this year? What if we did it a little bit differently? We also had feedback on how the enrollment process is really short, and we wanted to make it not so close to the summer program application process. We don't feel like the relationship building and then applying the summer trip programs were really necessarily the most streamlined and beneficial to our program delivery. So that was another cause of like, we should move interviews way up. We should even make but we can't really do that considering the scheduling and in the school. So what if we just scratch interviews? We're right now forming this, so in no way, shape, or form we're in ideation in mode right now. But like we're thinking about having like more strong enrollment. What would that look like? And like getting to know the student more, so we can do it more responsibly and getting to know the young person and not just have a 45-minute in-depth psychotherapy session, so to speak. So I think these are kind of the ideas that we're playing with, and that's why we've thought about not having interviews. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's super helpful because I've seen that listed on a few different like documents, and so just was curious like how you all came to that decision, and the ideation is super helpful. The phone cut out when you said the amount of enrollment time. How much were you thinking, or how much you guys kind of playing around with?
Yeah, we're just playing. So we typically we've tried to extend enrollment as much as possible in the past, so like 5 to 6 weeks, and even not long enough. So we're thinking about doing enrollment that's like 3 months. And enrollment would start maybe in like November and move to till February, and we can have that time. So these are just ideas. I'm meeting actually with with the high school program manager Brian and Colleen, our director of high school program, next week to start this process, and I'll definitely give updates to Neha as well as the outreach cohort and whatever y'all need network-wide.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks, Bradley, for walking us through that. Yeah. And since this surfaced a few other times, like a lot of the feedback Bradley shared or the observations and experiences they have in the Bay Area have been shared across sites, especially with respect to lifts and staff well-being, and like the questioning of necessity, since actually most of our students who are interviewed are accepted. Like Bradley pointed out, that's true across summer search. So I know it's been a conversation for some years, and for any of these, whatever we decided to do, this would be like a site decision, and then it would include opting into an evaluation so that we can make sure we're learning and can make an informed decision for the whole network based on what comes out of these little pilots, these smaller pilots in 20. Okay, I know we have about 5 minutes. Yeah, go ahead. Is that Sam?
Well,
there you are.
no, I can wait. I can talk with. I was just interested in understanding that timeline for enrollment, how it pushes up against the beginning of the fiscal year, and then where the interviewing of students take place. Is that happening in October? So be interested to understand how that kind of all falls into place or does it begin during the prior fiscal year?
That makes me think, Sam, that what I can do is put a placeholder on our second July meeting as a PSL to revisit these pilots, so that any site who's opted into these can actually explain what they're doing, and we can all pick this up together again.
That would be excellent.
Okay. Okay, great. And the last thing, something we've talked about extensively, I would say the last 2 calls, is one other proposed change to our application, which is removing the proof of income from the application and collecting that data at another time. And that's really coming from like that being identified as one of the biggest barriers to students actually applying to summer search, because it involves so much. It involves conversations with your parents, it involves finding a form, it involves like sensitive topics like immigration and money. And so we discussed, like, well, what if we took that out? Would we actually see more students applying? Would it make their process better? Would it make summer search more accessible? And we also talked about the flip side of that. If we collected that information later, like at enrollment or before the trip, what does that mean if we're essentially committing to accepting students and then maybe finding out later that they're out there, they exceed, they're outside of the requirement, the income requirement. And so are we willing as an organization to say, okay, we accept 10 to 20% of our students are going to be outside of this like income level. So one thing since our cohort call earlier this week, I did talk to Molly, and she suggested that I connect with Nick just to clarify, where does the decision making lie here? Like initially, I thought like this would be something that we'd arrive at as an NAPT with input from the cohort, the outreach cohort in the PSLs, but because of the potential implications on funding too, I just wasn't sure. And I know there's a new decision-making framework that the SNT's adopted. So I don't have an answer to that. I don't have an answer to or clarity about like who's owning this decision. But I just wanted to bring in the PSLs in this topic. I don't know, maybe if any outreach members want to add anything else.
I'll just add that, like, I think as an outreach cohort, we're all on board with removing the barrier. The only thing that I've brought up locally for us in Boston is that our school district does universal free and reduced lunch. And so that could potentially be an easy way of confirming that a student meets the requirement, but it wouldn't be easy for us here in Boston. And so I want to make it work, but also I don't feel comfortable. We had 13 over income students this year, and a couple of them were like $100,000, $150,000 income for 2 folks in the household, and I don't feel comfortable with that. So just really wanting as much like thoughts around like how we can remove the barrier and also make sure we're serving the students that we say we want to serve.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the core of my question too. And thinking about the free and reduced lunch, the universal piece, I think Philly is pretty similar. We have like maybe one school that does the I forget what it's called, verification.
I don't know, maybe if, Bay Area. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just thinking of, I wonder if there could still be, the barrier is like all the documentation, but I don't know if it's necessarily like reporting a general income number or something like that, or like naming an income requirement and then having students or parents check like yes or no, I meet this requirement. And there's still not like 100% certainty with it, but if that's like that's a less invasive way of naming a requirement and trying to get folks that meet that. I wonder what that would feel like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that, May. We talked about that this week too, of still retaining the requirements on the paperwork, and students like checking a box to indicate their eligibility. And what was raised, and I think you're getting at this too, is that it's sometimes we still find out, like once the paperwork is submitted, that the students are over income, but they don't know that at the beginning. And I think that could be a way to get at for most applicants to get an accurate picture.
Yeah, the only other thing I was gonna say is like that it seems like everyone, from a programmatic standpoint, folks want to be enrolling students into the program that don't have the same level of financial resources as other students that we could be serving. So there's agreement across program and development on that. I guess it feels, I've worked in an organization where there were like the funding, it's not like there were funding implications when we changed how we asked for income information. It was just like we had to do funding messaging differently. So I think that's just a like thing I would, as you're checking with Nick, that's just like that would be my stance, is like it's not, with just because something is harder funding wise doesn't mean we don't do it programmatically. It's just that like we have to figure out how to do that, because there's agreement. Like nobody wants to be working with the wealthiest students and families across the country. So there's agreement there. It's just like I don't want the funding implications of our current way of communicating stuff to be the reason we don't do something that will be good for our students.
I appreciate that, Meha. That's a really good point. Yeah, it's more about changing how we message, not about how we do what we do. I know the outreach cohort agreed to be here for half an hour, and we're just over that time. So I wonder if maybe this is a topic that you can all continue at your site level. And while I go back to check with Nick, and then I can follow up with an email next week from what I learned from that, and then see if there are any other thoughts or like ideas that have surfaced in your local site. I'm seeing some nodding, yeah. Okay. Okay, and then if we need to, if there isn't like consensus, we can also make more time to have a focused discussion to arrive at somewhere. And also hopefully by then I'll have some clarity around decision-making rules, which will help us too. Okay. Thanks Martina, Tolu, Bradley.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Okay, does anyone need anything before we talk about texting? No, we're moving really fast today. Lots of content.
I just wanted to, if folks can see, Brian's here. Hi, Brian.
Hi.
Hey, Brian.
I wasn't here for the conversation about texting last week, and so I invited the folks that were part of that back to this call. So I just wanted to let you know that other people might pop in too.
Oh, okay, good.
Okay.
Okay, well, we can, should we hang for a minute, Meha, while everybody assembles, or just dive into it?
Yeah, I'm not sure who else will join, so I just wanted to let you know if you see more people, they're supposed to be here.
Okay, okay. Okay, sounds good. Well, shifting gears. So from outreach to texting, Roxanne and I want to spend like 6 minutes on just some like info and content, and then we want to spend most of the time on a discussion about whether, like, given the content and context, whether it feels like the right timing to integrate texting in FY20. So we're going to be sharing like the content and facilitator role. All right, I'll kick us off with 2 quick slides. So there's a lot more information in the OneNote. You didn't have to have read any of that before the call, and you can always return to it later, and feel free to share broadly with your team, pending what comes out of this conversation. But I just wanted to summarize like why, to go back to the proposal that I shared with everyone last month, I guess now, about why this is coming up again. And so we've been texting students at Summer Search for years, and we did a formal pilot and learned that it worked. And so we are now we are in Salesforce, and Salesforce has the ability to integrate texting directly into Salesforce. So we're bringing this back up again to explore if FY20 is the right year to have texting integrated into Salesforce. That means that mentors could message students directly from Salesforce, and those contacts would be recorded in Salesforce. And just to highlight, we think that this would be really good for students because they could still experience the continuity and reliability with texting. You're all using a different texting platform right now, so that would be continued with a new platform. That staff can be more supported by students because all of those efforts will be recorded in Salesforce, so there'll be a more accurate and detailed picture of the conversations and the student needs. And the content that students are interacting with can be more engaging because this will allow for functionality like campaign messages and links and sending surveys in a way that's different from the platforms you all are using now. For staff, the biggest benefit is it's a time saver because there isn't any data entry required. It's right there through your Salesforce platform on your phone or on your computer. For any sites that are still using personal cell phones, it's a chance to better honor boundaries. And it could mean that you're not needing to manage a separate platform at your site. It could be managed and administered nationally. And then the last thing is that it contributes to program quality too, just because the data will be more accurate and anybody supporting a student can see all of the conversations and threads between mentors and students. Yeah, I think I've covered a lot of these already. Salesforce can integrate texting and can help with student data and data culture, can help also facilitate hybrid mentoring too, because in the pilot, in sites that are doing groups now, you know that we relied a lot on texting to send things like meeting reminders or updates about room changes. So it's really handy in terms of the group feature of texting. It's really handy to have that for facilitating hybrid mentoring. It's a win for staff to have less time that they need to enter data. And we've been doing it for a while. We've learned about it. Like, if we don't do now, when will we do it? Okay, that's kind of the case, the quick case for why. I'll toss it to you, Roxanne.
Great, thanks, Alex. So kind of work on what we have done to date on kind of seeing the feasibility of moving and the integration of texting to FY20 is we started out looking at and trying to understand how texting is being used among all the sites to date. So thank you to Alex for doing all these interviews with either yourselves or staff at your site to kind of understand how everyone's doing it and where there might be differences among different staff. We also now know like how and like what systems you all are using, which is great as well. And so those are kind of all the baseline kind of understanding that we need to know how and what to proceed in the future. So what we still need to do is to kind of revisit our providers that we kind of had in mind in the past and see which are the ones that are going to be likely to meet our needs in terms of Salesforce integration and ease of use and all of those kinds of things. And once we have kind of narrowed down our list of who, or narrowed down to who we would like, and then we would engage yourselves or your members at your site to kind of chime in on our contenders and then also the process of what that might look like. And then we'll move kind of on forward there to see how and if this aligns with kind of our work streams and the program priorities, depending on how the conversation today kind of moves. Anything else that you want to add to that, Alex, that I might have missed?
Nope, you got it.
Okay, great.
Okay, yeah, this is, so linked in the notebook is like a couple page write-up. That's a summary from those interviews that you all contributed to, but I just wanted to pull out a couple things, just that across site for current use of texting. All sites are using texting to communicate with students, mostly to confirm or schedule meetings or send event reminders. A few folks ascribe to like light mentoring happening over text, but it's mostly coordination purposes. All sites are using a different platform for texting students, and across sites there isn't reliability in terms of entering text into Salesforce. Sometimes when it is entered, it's because it turns into a mentoring conversation, and it's like kind of hit or miss about when it's recorded. There are also some themes coming up around desires. So if we did integrate texting into Salesforce for 20, some desires include making sure that those are still used primarily for regular one-on-one conversation, and if there's the option for group text or text campaigns, which is like something that's pre-scheduled and has some automated responses built in, that would be great too, but most people want to just keep using it for one-on-one. Another request was to retain existing numbers if possible, recognizing that students are already using them, so can we just keep the ones that they have? Another request was to limit the number of numbers students have to get a hold of Summer Search, so as much as possible, like keep that number low, like 1 or 2 numbers that the students need to know to either text or call Summer Search and reach their mentor. And then finally, trying to identify a platform that we can also integrate with a future phone system.
So in our process so far, and kind of in the process that we had engaged in after the texting pilot from a few years ago, our top contenders at the moment right now are mostly SMS and Signal Line. A lot of you are familiar with the term Signal Line. You either use it yourself or you recognize it from the pilot that we did as well. And so with these two, basically what we're going to be looking at is, again, like I mentioned, ease of use for staff, ease of data transfer, and who can integrate seamlessly with Salesforce. Part of this process also is looking at cost, obviously. So from what we have learned at this moment, and we don't have updated pricing, but based on the research that we've done so far, we can estimate that network-wide, this cost will be between $7,000 to $12,000 per year. And some of the questions and where those costs kind of come into, or where the cost shifts is the number of numbers we use and things like that. And then the other thing that is still up in the air as well is how the costs will be shared, or who is going to be paying for it. Is it going to be a split between national or site, or the site's going to carry it all, or what it is? That's another question that we still need to figure out with guidance from national, and then just kind of seeing like how things pan out with the rest of the program initiative as well. So if we move on to the next slide, the initial timeline that we are proposing, if we are thinking about, and it does kind of come up as one of the top contenders to kind of integrate for FY20, would be that over the summer we are going to finalize who the service provider will be and how much it will cost. And then moving right into FY20, we will spend probably the first quarter setting up the system and training staff with the initial goal of prioritizing just the conversational one-on-one text messaging first. That will be kind of like the baseline usage, and then waiting until later on in probably sometime in FY21 to start looking at those program text messaging campaigns, because that in and of itself will take a little bit more training, and the process around standardization and training individual site staff and all that kind of stuff. So that is just kind of more labor intensive in terms of the planning and the process building around that. Okay, so with that in mind, I think we're just gonna jump into the discussion pieces. Alex, do you want to take it away in terms of how we're gonna move forward with it?
Yeah, so I learned recently about a process Josie shared with me for like having discussions that can inform decisions, where everybody gets the floor and has a chance to speak one round. And when you're answering this, so the question is, given the other priorities we have for FY20 that we talked about earlier with Molly, do you want to integrate texting into Salesforce in 20? And in response to that question, you can share your concerns, your hopes, your questions, any limiting factors. You can opt out. You don't have to share. So we'll do that in a round with all the PSLs and other site staff speaking. And then we'll do another round because we know that maybe when you hear something from somebody else, it'll bring up something for you. So that was what I was thinking in terms of a process for this discussion to make sure that everyone's voice is heard.
Alex, before we jump into that, I'm just noticing a question from Aaron. And I don't know when this was asked, if it was asked part of this topic or from the previous one. So I don't know, Eric, do you want to chime in really quickly? I don't want to ignore what you put in the chat though.
This was from when we were talking about the taking away interviews. So
okay.
Unless there is like a variance between hybrid mentoring and Summer Search Classic, I think we can ignore it.
Thanks for noting that. Does anyone want to start?
I can start if nobody else is jumping in. My answer to the question is I don't know. I am very pro texts getting integrated into or translated into Salesforce activities automatically. That is a huge thing. And the campaign feature is pretty important to us in New York. So I think a concern for me is that if that wasn't on the table for FY20, we would probably be paying for a separate service to be able to do the campaigns ourselves, which makes it less appealing to do this national effort. The other just kind of question mark in my mind that I brought up with Alex before is just thinking about our phone system. So I've been looking a lot into different providers. So I just don't really know how phone would work with Mowgli or Signalvine. So if it would work great for an effective cost, awesome. But I've just been thinking about other things like Dialpad. So anyway, I'll pause there.
And just a process point, Ronxu and I will hold on our on responding until everybody shares.
Hi, my name's Brian. I'm a program manager and I work with the high school program here. I think I haven't heard I think that we're interested in efficiency, and I think that campaign messaging could be helpful, especially for our college access and our college success programs. It's hard for me to know what the priorities should be. I haven't heard mentors. I think that mentors in general have higher priorities than texting integration in Salesforce, including just general support with Salesforce that I would rather see prioritized, but it's hard for me to know without seeing the other options. And then I think what's really important when I've talked to most mentors is they absolutely want to keep the cell phone number that they've been using. And if that wasn't a function, then they wouldn't want to use it. So I think if there's an option to use it, that's fine, but I don't think we can require it for folks. I don't think we should require it for folks. I think the change management that's involved with that is not something that we really want to explore for FY20. So if it's an easy opt-in, this is a way to get your number that you already have and is automatically logging stuff on Salesforce. I think that's fine, but if it requires a new number or having to log stuff through Salesforce, I don't think that would be beneficial for mentors to use.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Neha.
I was going to say, since we're unmuted, yeah, I don't know, leaning toward no. I think that I'm hearing what Brian is sharing. I don't know that I've heard a ton of, if efficiency is easy and then that's great, but it seems like there's a lot of like conditions that would make this work or not work for our team. And it feels unclear to me if a platform could really meet all of those conditions. So this doesn't feel like like it's a major issue in how it's working right now for mentors. And so that makes me hesitant. And I'm just making the connection between what we also just talked about with an online application for outreach. And if there's going to be like any place where we're putting investment into like change management around Salesforce, I think it'd be like making sure that runs really smoothly. And then the updates that are being made for college access, as well as like any updates that are made with the new post-secondary program, those feel like more core to me to like focus on for our team.
Yeah, I think for me, I kind of fall probably somewhere in between Bay Area and New York in terms of what y'all are saying. I think the numbers question is really significant to me. We use Ring Central, and so we have a soft phone number, which like with Dialpad, for example, with the on-call system has been fine to like route a soft phone number from Ring Central to Dialpad, or I don't fully understand that process, but wrong to it, I think you understand what I mean. But thinking about if Mowgli or Signalvine could do the same, because right now like staff use the Ring Central app on their desktop and on their phones in order to text with staff and students. And so that, yeah, so I think it just like changes how we text staff or students, excuse me. And then the other question is like Q2 is also when like hybrid mentoring is going to be rolling out, and just kind of like thinking about like one more like significant change being our phone system, and not being, our staff will for the first time really ever not be working in our office for the first time. So just thinking that like phones are going to become much more significant for us in the next year. So I think it's like a maybe for me. I definitely want to get the phone numbers question figured out before I give a more final answer and talk with, I think, staff a little bit more.
Yeah, I am thinking about how we use texting. So we use it during our recruiting season, and we use it with our post-secondary college students. Fortunately, the cost is being in-kinded by a funder, supporter. So on that end, there's not a cost for us. It feels like it's been a useful resource to the staff. So it's kind of hard. I don't know if I could suggest either direction. If I had to, I would say in favor of how the staff are feeling, and it feels like it's working for them. So I would have to kind of support in that direction. So it'd be interesting to see what direction we go with this.
Thanks, everyone. I don't know if, I know the number question has come up a lot, and we discussed it. We also met with Mowgli, so I don't know if maybe Rongsun, we could speak to that a little bit and then do another round.
Right. So from what I understand at this point in time is that at least if you're working with a soft phone provider and they provide some kind of texting already, or some kind of texting or messaging feature already, like Dialpad does and Ring Central does, because on Dialpad you can do the same thing you can do with Ring Central, is that if you have the app on your phone, you can send the student text messages via your Dialpad number. In terms of like group messaging, where that gets limited is that I think the number of numbers you can text in one group might be like 9 or 10. But there's a limit to it. So you wouldn't be able to do a huge blast of numbers through a soft phone system. Erin, I'm not sure if Ring Central is the same or not, but I'm assuming that it might be similar. In my conversations with Rob over at Ring Central, I'm not sorry, at SMS or at Mowgli SMS, there's a way that he can test whether or not a number on a soft phone can be adapted to their service. But in general, he has said that if it is a soft phone number that's attached to like Ring Central or dial pad or something like that, usually they will not give you that. They will not give up that phone number for you to text because they want to maintain control over that phone number. So if we do soft phones plus conjunction with, you know, an SMS service, it might be something where we would have to think creatively on how to strategically pair the numbers and keep those numbers down to kind of keep on that parameter of the less numbers the student needs to know, the better. So we would have to kind of think about how to pair those up together. I think I covered it. I don't know if there was any other part to that. I think one follow-up question I just want to ask Bay Area is that in terms of the staff wanting to use keep their phone numbers, is it also a matter of, because this is what I was also thinking as well, is do they want to be able to use their physical phone to do it as well too? Because then with the apps, I know you can cover it, but like, you know, the porting over like a personal number, they could do, you know, but then that would mean that, you know, they would have to, I guess, stick with that number for or I'm just trying to think of and maybe this is a moot point anyway, but in terms of like, if we do get it integrated and numbers do have to change, it would mean like a double like texting system depending on when the wave of students hit. So I just wanted to kind of like mention that as like an aside too. But I mean, I don't know. It just means that we just don't do texting in general. So, so I just want to put that out there.
Sure, I mean, so most mentors use either their personal cell phones, and so they have iMessage or Android. I'm not sure how that works, or they use Google Voice, which has like an online interface or works on their phone. But it's been very important to have a mobile. We have like 5 groups, maybe 6, and so that's really important for those groups. It's also important for one-on-ones. And then anything that's like a campaign style message, we just have mentors forward that individually through texting. But it's been really helpful to have it on their computers, but also on their cell phones at the same time. And that's worked really well. I think if there's like a data entry issue, that would be like a different solution where we might need to do some training there, or just like think about how we want to define texting in Salesforce. But I think if it resulted in people having to change those numbers, I think rightfully so, mentors would have a lot of concern around that. We have mentors who've been here for 5 years and want to keep that number alive. And so I don't think the need is greater than disrupting that right now.
Bronx one, do you think that Signalvine will be the same with the soft phone issue? You said Mowgli said that they wouldn't be able to do that, but
we actually need to get an updated demo from Signalvine at this point, because from what I am aware of, you're texting through a website. Is that right, Jason or Sam? I can't remember who. Right, you're doing it on a web interface, so you're not doing it on a phone. And so they have a new Salesforce Sync integration, but I don't know if that also means that you could text natively from Salesforce and then also a phone as well. But so those are things that we just have to like see. So I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
I know it's 4 o'clock, and I know that there's still half an hour that the PSLs could be available, but I'm thinking about you, Brian, and anyone else who's in the Bay Area that might have a hard stop right now. I'm wanting to go around again one more time, and yeah, I'm not. I also want to honor people's time and their other meetings.
We don't have a hard stop.
Yeah, we don't have a hard stop. And I was just curious if you all wanted to share too, to complete the round, if that's helpful. I don't know if that's how it works, but.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I appreciate that invitation. I mean, I feel like I really want to do this only if it feels like the right priority for everyone, because there's so much going on, and I believe that organizationally we should move in this direction, just so that we have consistency in our data and how we support students, and can launch some of these more strategic campaigns that really worked in the pilot and that New York has been doing. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I don't think it makes sense to do something if it doesn't feel like the right time, given all the other things that we're doing right now. So I really feel like the opinions of this group should inform that decision. And if not everybody is like on the same page of like, let's do it with gusto, then I think that we should just proceed as we've been doing, where sites who want to be doing it are doing it independently, and then we explore it again, maybe in Q2 or 3 of next year and planning for FY21. What do you think, Roxy-Wan? What's your...
We're basically in alignment for this. I think one of the things that had come up in discussion previously, I guess just through just general NAPT meetings, is, you know, there's so much that's going on that, you know, in terms of just change and just things from a national standpoint, is that one of the things that we also want to do is make sure we're meeting your needs. And like every couple of months or every quarter or so, I always hear about texting and things like that. And then, you know, it was one of those things where we want to put something in the hands of your staff that feel like Alex put in the thing that feels like a win, that would help increase efficiency, that would make something much easier for you. And so if, let's say, the time for that isn't now, then that's totally fine. It was just kind of like something that we had anticipated, because we, you know, the texting pilot ended so long ago, and, you know, I just, you know, questions just come up, you know, the texting one comes up pretty frequently for me. At least once a quarter, someone will ask me about it. So it was one of those things where it's like, okay, let's bring it up. Let's see how it lands. Is it something that would make sense to do now or not? And, you know, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Maybe for some sites it is and some sites it isn't. But, you know, and if it's not, like Alex said, if it's something that doesn't stick for all sites, then maybe we can't, you know, I don't think it's worth trying to pursue it something nationally. The other thought I had in mind too is, you know, maybe, you know, it just came to me as well, and we can kind of reserve this for later, because I do also want to honor the process for everybody too, is what if we reverse the implementation? Because what Jason said is, like, for him, the important part are those campaign messages, to gather data, to feed back into the system, kind of looping, or even just reminders. Like, what if we started the other way around and we kind of roll it out like hybrid mentoring or whatever, and do it for sites that are already doing it, and roll it out one quarter at a time, or like whatever, develop that process within the site, see how that rolls, and then just kind of like move it around. Then that way, for Bay Area, keeping those personal numbers will still be, you know, it'll still be possible to keep those personal numbers, but like things like, let's say if we start with outreach, or if we start with like post-secondary stuff, we can still collect data for the post-secondary teams. They can, you know, without having it feel too intrusive. It's just the one number or whatever it is, and then we can kind of roll from there. So that's another thing that we can think about in terms of like, if we wanted to do something in FY20, that is something, and maybe it will roll out like a little bit later in FY20, given everything else that's going on, but it's something that we can start thinking and start planning for. If, you know, that's something, you know, that sounds like it might be in closer alignment to like your work streams, or bringing that efficiency that will help, you know, your staff more in the long run. So.
Certainly an interesting idea, worth exploring.
Can you say that one more time, Erin? You kind of cut out in the very beginning.
Oh yeah, I hadn't really thought about reversing it, and I think that like could be interesting. The other thing that I was thinking about was like, if you guys have ever thought about with like the quarterly survey, and just think about like when you go to like a voting booth and there's kind of like a ballot question, if we've ever thought about on the quarterly survey, kind of putting like, would you be in favor of like integrating Salesforce texting, and, you know, with like a 1 to 2 sentence description of like what that would look like, if that would also like give a sense of sort of like staff buy-in for this, just thinking that it would impact so many staff members, and that like we are only a sampling of those people. So I don't know, just like as we think about the usefulness of those surveys, I think that that could be a way to make them more useful, and like people pay attention to ballot questions, in elections. Maybe they'd pay attention to that. Off topic, but just an idea.
That's a good one. I don't know how much control we have to enter one off. I would have to ask Will about that for sure. That's a great idea.
Yeah, I think the campaign part could be really interesting. I'd be curious to hear like how it could be used in outreach and how we could have students text questions and have that be logged, and then the same number could distribute surveys after events, and like so anything that requires like a max texting effort to like over someone's caseload, I think could be helpful. Again, I don't know how we're weighing other priorities financially, so it's something that's interesting, but I don't know if that makes more sense than other priorities that might be listed in the call that I wasn't part of. I think that could be the more useful part right now, and then pausing on one-on-one and anything that would affect someone's relationship and ability to communicate with current students.
Yeah, the more that we talk about it, I mean, I basically said this before, but I'm thinking not even so much as reversing the order, like you said, Rungs one, but is it just a different goal? Because it sounds like for the sites, it might be nice to have one-to-one texting integrated into Salesforce, but I don't know if that's a huge priority for staff, for mentors. And if I'm misunderstanding that, then there's something else. But what, like, I've been thinking about it a lot. I know I've talked a lot about it with other staff here. A much bigger priority would be having phone calls integrated into Salesforce. So totally different topic, but that feels like a much huger priority than one-to-one texting. Oh, but then the other comment I was just going to say, separate from all that, because I also think retaining cell phone numbers is important to an extent. And I also think for some students, they change their numbers all the time for lots of different reasons. So just me personally, I would feel good about changing our number that we give to students, like for a mentor to change the number that they give to students once. So it would just have to be strategic. Like if we can know that this new number is going to work for all of these different purposes in the future, or at least the next few years or whatever, to me that feels like a worthwhile change.
Things like this organically turned into our second round. Sam, do you have any other new thoughts?
No, I personally, I will support both the network and the site. So I'm supportive of whatever I think where we land at. So no.
Aaron, I saw your question here. I think it could be less expensive to just do campaign messages, right, Roxanne? Because we would need fewer numbers. Yeah, it could be less expensive.
I mean, yeah, potentially if you're just going to have it for campaign messages, it could be one number per site, or if you wanted like to separate like one number for post-secondary announcements and or surveys versus a high school one or something like that, it could be two. I don't know. It kind of depends on like how you want to use it. I mean, theoretically, it could be one number from all of Summer Search, but then we have to see how that would be. But I assume you would want a local number for your own local site.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I was also just thinking from like a rollout perspective, maybe trying it out from campaign messages and also like not having to incur like a larger cost in the first year. I mean, I guess when you divide it across sites, it's not really like as like a big cost, but just that might also like gain momentum naturally.
Right. I mean, well, now that I'm looking at re-envisioning what the budget looks like in my head in terms of the cost, the number itself is, amount of numbers itself is like a nominal, like monthly cost, depending on Signalvine versus Mobley. If their pricing structure has stayed the same, Signalvine charges per number of people we want to text. Is that right, Jason? Right. And then Mobley charges it by the amount of messages that get sent out. So if we limit it to just campaigns, then it would be fewer. So we win on that end, because conversational texting can be yes, no, with just all the conversations, like that will eat up a lot of it. That would take up a lot of the cost of those conversational ones. So.
It seems like there's some interest then in building around the possibility of like being really focused and maybe doing just campaign messages in 20 at like designated times in our programming, like either outreach or post-secondary or around events. I also heard you say, Jason, the bigger priority is integrating phone systems, and I saw nodding when you said that. So that makes me wonder, like, is that also a reason for us to postpone texting to see if that can be prioritized? I know Rongsu and I earlier this year reached out to Will and Keith as like the holders of that part of operations, and they said it was not likely that that was going to be prioritized for FY20. So I'm thinking about that, and then I'm thinking about your point, Erin, about like inviting all staff to weigh in with their preference on this question. And I wouldn't do that if we didn't feel like have some kind of like alignment about how to move forward. Yeah, just kind of lifting up some of what came up out of this second round and wondering what a next step could be, if this is, maybe if we can go around and see if there is interest in that option of targeted campaigns, then Bronxton and I can do some work on what that would look like, what it would cost, what the implementation would look like, and come back to the group if there's interest in that. What do you guys think about that next step?
The next step of researching campaign, like details on how the campaign platform will work.
Yeah, and us coming back to you all with some more info about that option.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that we might do is check in with other staff too, to see, so we can better understand the need as well.
That's great. Yeah, in the absence of maybe not knowing if we can do something like that in the SLA, that would be good. If everybody could bring a more like fuller perspective from your site about it.
Yeah, that works for me too as next steps.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I heard Sam say yeah. I saw you nod, Jason. Yeah. Okay, that's what we'll do then, and then that can inform where we go next. So we, Ronxwan and I are at that NBT retreat next week, so it'll probably be 2 weeks before we follow up with this group to send materials and schedule time. Yeah.
I just want to ask a quick follow-up question regarding the phone piece of it. I just wanted to hear from other sites too, how you feel about that piece, like integrating the phones or some kind of like automation or something like that would help facilitate like getting those calls logged.
Yeah, I think that'd be huge if we could get that automatically logged.
Or at least the base of it. The
Yeah.
part of it started and you just add your notes, right? Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think people would be into that.
Sam, do you have any thoughts on the phone integration piece?
Yeah. With the if we were to move forward, right, with the texting, would the features be, you know, earlier when you were talking about the surveys and you said they were compatible to desktop, mobile, and tablets, would it be the same or would it be an app?
I think it would depend on the provider. And so we'll definitely have to follow up. Like for SignalMine, I believe you can only do it via, you know, a web browser. So you'd have to use whatever web browser was on your device. I'm going to double check with Mosley to confirm, but I'm not positive about that as well.
Okay. Well, that was the thing that was in my mind when I was comparing the earlier conversations and this one to see how similar or dissimilar they would be. I know with the general staff, they use a Google, a Google platform that texts from their computers. And so these are the folks who aren't using Signal and Vibe. I think the Google feature is connected to their phone.
Okay. And then just one related but random question. As far as you know, do your staff track their calls with their students in Outlook?
Oh my God.
What did you say, Rensu, and track your students with what?
When you're scheduling calls when your staff are scheduling calls with their students, are those tracked in Outlook? Like they put those appointments in Outlook?
Our staff do, but they're reoccurring, so they might not happen exactly at that time. They like set a time that's reoccurring each week.
Yeah, outside the Bay Area, it's a pretty lot of diverse practices. So some in Outlook, but some in not. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think New York might be both, probably most use appointments and a lot of recurring appointments, but probably not everyone. But that does bring up my other wrench to throw out there is Calendly, the scheduling app with the Salesforce integration. So as soon as you make an appointment with a student, it automatically should, I think, create something in Salesforce, which would be great because that would work for in-person appointments too, not just the phone. Yeah, and something we're looking to explore in FY20 ourselves in New York.
Pam, do you know how your staff are tracking?
No, I'd have to inquire.
Okay. No worries. And the reason why I was asking that was related to your point about Calendly, because there is an Outlook integration for Salesforce as well. And so I'm trying to figure out what the easiest ways to link all of those three things together. Is it, do we link Salesforce with Outlook and then whatever? And then that could potentially be us working around the phone system thing, is using the Outlook appointment scheduling for that. So sorry, just me kind of digging all along creatively since I have your ears. All right.
I'd be curious to learn more about the Calendly piece. I think that's getting used more and more at our site.
Right.
Well, maybe one more step, given that that folks are saying like, yes, phone integration is our priority, maybe one more step is for me to connect back with Will and Keith, and I don't know who else, just to raise up like, hey, we're in the midst of FY20 planning. This is like in the context of texting, this emerged as a bigger priority. Like, is there room to revisit this in the planning? Just like as an advocate for this group and the sites. So that's one other step
Right.
I'm thinking from this part of the conversation. Okay. So in Bay Area, you'll check in with your team and get a pulse check, and then the other site who wants to can take that step too. Roxanne, Juan, and I will work on the scoping, the implementation for these campaign messages at different points in our program, and I'll follow up with Will about the phone integration need. And then we can maybe, in our follow-up too with you guys, we can also follow up with any more info about Calendly. There's interest there. Okay. Thanks. This is new for us, and I think with especially with hybrid mentoring and moving to that process to try to be more inclusive about our decision making. That's like a similar approach. That's the spirit behind this conversation and how we want to approach the texting decision. So thank you all for participating in this like multiple week process to get here, and it seems like we've adapted to come up with another step that could work and meet everybody's needs. Okay.
Thank you for facilitating this process. It's been helpful and appreciated.
For sure. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah. You're welcome. We'll pick it up again in a couple weeks. I'll find a time for us. Okay. Bye, everybody.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Francois.
Bye. Thank you all.